Picture this. You're starting a speech. You want to write a speech. You start to write down a couple bullet points. Here's one point, here's another point, another point. Great, you got your 3 bullet points down. You start thinking about what you're going to say about each bullet point. Get it kind of all planned out in your head. And then you start practicing it, and you realize you're going from one point right to the next point, and there's nothing between them. It just sounds weird. One moment you're talking about A, next moment you're talking about B, and you're thinking, this just doesn't work. It just doesn't flow for some reason. There's not any flow happening here. Have you had that challenge? If you've been speaking for any length of time about anything more than just one point, probably at some time you've had that challenge. Getting up there, trying to move from one point to the other without it seeming weird or strange or uncomfortable. The thing about it is, it's easy to do wrong. And perhaps you've heard these speeches. Where the speaker gets up and says, well, and we're going to talk about this thing for a while. We're talking about this thing. Okay, now we're talking about this thing for a while, and go on about this thing. Oh, now we're talking about another thing for a while. And you, and everyone in the audience is thinking, how do these connect? Why are all these different things being mentioned? And was it 3 things, or 5, or 2, or... Have you heard these speeches? They just kind of ramble on. You can't really keep track of all the different stuff going on. Have you given one of these speeches? Or if you're talking, you realize that it's just not flowing. The transitions aren't happening. Transitions are something a lot of speakers just kind of ignore. Don't worry about it. No big deal. I got one point, and then I'm going to go on another point, or another point, another point. The audience will keep up. Well, actually they probably won't. They'll probably be confused about where these points are going and how they relate to each other. So you've got to do something to really make it more easy to follow where you're going. Easy to follow how you're moving from this point to that point to that point. It's something you don't need to do when you're very beginning of your speech, but you start getting prepared to give that talk. Really important to get these things down. And as far as transitions, there are 3 basic simple transitions you can use. They're very effective, and they'll get you from here to there without much trouble. They're things that professional speakers have used for a long time, and things that people newer to speaking may not be aware of. As a result, their speeches suffer and their speaking suffers. It doesn't have to be that way. Just understanding these few very simple, very basic techniques will help you smoothly transition from one point to the next. So the audience is with you. The audience understands. The audience nods and thinks, okay, I got that. All right, I see where it's going. I see where it's going. And that feeling when you really understand where the flow of the speech is going, what's happening to it, that's what transitions make possible. Today, you're going to learn 3 transitions used in different situations. You're going to find out about what are the sort of things that most speakers do that doesn't work, and how you can avoid making sure you don't do that. You find out a few other things about how to make really effective, really useful, really powerful transitions. So when you go out on stage, you sound smooth and polished, as if you've been doing it for years. Even if you haven't really had that much time to put the speech together, understanding how transitions work is a tool that will make you seem effective, capable, knowledgeable even, and very quickly take you up to speed. So understanding these 3 basic principles are powerful tools, powerful techniques for helping you develop and build that speaking connection with your audience. And to make that transition happen, is challenging. There's something simple you can do. Something which doesn't take a lot of thought, doesn't take a lot of work, and it very clearly indicates where you're moving from one thought to the other. Very clearly indicates that you are making this transition in your speech. And that is if you pause between your points. It sounds simple. It is simple. And it's so powerful. The challenge of using the pause is that as speakers, you want to talk. As a speaker, you want to talk. Does that make sense? When you're a speaker, you should be up there talking. So you start talking and talking and talking and going on and on and on and on and on. Here's my first point, okay, here's another point going on, okay, now forget about this one and go over to the next point, and problem comes, your mind gets all confused about what's going on. So a pause will certainly help. The challenge is most speakers don't pause long enough. They think they're pausing, but really, they're not. Maybe you've heard these speeches. And now I want to move my second point. Okay, second point. You're thinking, okay, was that a pause? Was not a point? Now I want to move to the next point. All right, the next point. The next point I want to bring up is, okay, the next point here is, and then, okay, the point after that, and then, all right, there's another point. The thing about that is, it isn't a full pause. It's sort of like what happens when a driver gets up to a stop sign. There's an old joke in Mad Magazine. If you don't know Mad Magazine, it's just a magazine, it's a cartoon magazine with a lot of funny stuff in it. And something I remember from past, an old Mad Magazine, it said, road signs we'd really like to see. The idea is these are road signs that tell us what actually happens. So there's this big sign that says, slow down and fake a full stop. So that's what many speakers do. They slow down a little bit, and they slow down, and then they keep on going on. There's no pause. So if you watch drivers coming up to the stop sign, you'll notice they do get a little bit slower, but they zip right through. Very few people actually stop. And by stop, I mean the car isn't moving. If you're pulling up to a stop sign and your car is still moving all the way before and after the stop sign, you haven't stopped. Same thing with speaking. Going to do a pause, pause, and then continue. So if I were dividing points up, come to the end and wrap that point up, okay, that's that point. Another thing to consider is a pause, a full pause. Perhaps the reason that a lot of speakers don't use a pause is because it's scary. After all, the whole point of speaking and being up here on stage is you can talk. If you stop talking, somehow you're not speaking, and you're not speaking, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And it's that sort of mindset that creates the problem with the pause. If you can pause for the point, it's a powerful way to connect. Pause for the point. Just make sure it's a full pause, not one of those stop sign pauses. And then go on to the next point. That's really all there is to it. But just make sure that you do the full pause. Pause for the point. And once you've made that point, once you're going on there, okay, made the point, all right, pause, here comes the next point. So you pause, and then you move on to the next point. Not everybody is comfortable with pausing or pausing too much. As I said, you're a speaker, you're there to speak. So the pauses are powerful. And it's used to pause to the point. There may be other pauses you're doing in the middle of that speech. If you've got a lot of pauses, dramatic pauses in the middle of that speech, and then you want to transition to a new point, pause may not work that well. Pause may not say to people, okay, we got a new point coming up, and pause may just mean, oh, all right, going to continue the same point as you've been doing. So when that happens, another technique, that is to move. To move. Just make a mission for your position. Make a mission for your position. So if you're moving for some reason up there, just make sure you're moving to somewhere. Now there are different ways to move depending upon your situation. You can move if you're moving on stage already. If you're on stage and you're moving back and forth, great. Then it's very simple to make that move. You just start out here, and you move over to here. It's that simple. So you move to a different location on stage. That indicates it. So you make a mission for your position. Okay, you start out here, you move over to there. That's simple. Start here, move over to here. Makes the point. The thing to be careful about, the thing happens to most speakers, is they don't make a big enough movement. Now, stage here is a little bit small, so you can't make huge movements. If you have a stage, make sure you make the big movement from here, way over, so people can clearly see, okay, that's the place for point one. That's the place for the other point. Great, so that's the place for one point. That's the place for another point. Make a mission for your position. It's just that simple. Now, when I've gone out on stage before until I really understood this, sometimes I just stand in the same place and make 3 points. And afterwards I get feedback saying, Tim, interesting speech, but I wasn't quite clear what your points were because they kind of seemed to all blur into each other. Well, that taught me. After that I started to make sure I was moving on stage. And then, sometimes I get feedback of, well, you seem to be sort of moving on stage, but I couldn't really tell. You didn't move that much. Once again, I learned, big movements. Big movements. And if you have a really big stage, make huge movements. So it makes really clear to the people way, way, way in the back that you're moving from point to point. Smaller stage, movements don't have to be so big. So stage is something to concern for movements. The other thing is if you're on stage and you're moving around, fine. Make a mission for your position just by moving on stage. But if you're speaking from behind a lectern, or whatever reason, you're limited in how much movement you can make, then you can use these things. Yeah, use these things. Hands. Your hands are tremendously powerful. And I've kind of been doing that all along in gestures. Make a mission with position. So here's 1 point. Okay, now we've got another point. 1 point, another point. So if you're simply there at the lectern and you finish 1 point, so okay, that's the way that works. Now turn it into something different. That's all you need to do. That simple gesture of here, there, helps you get from here to there. It's a simple transition if you're at a lectern. If you're standing behind a lectern, reading off some prepared thing you have, this to this can indicate that transition. So make a mission for your position, depending upon whether you are speaking on stage, big physical movements. If you're behind a lectern and you can't move around, then the hands work just as well. Make a mission for your position. And just one more thing. And the final point is something that you can do, particularly if you have something that's done in terms of steps. if you've got these different steps and things have to be done in order, it really helps to use this method. It really helps to use this method because it helps the audience keep it clear in their mind where things are and which step you're on. And for that, you want to name the number. Name the number. That simply means keep track of the steps. And as you may have noticed, I've been doing a little bit of that going on here. A little bit of here's the first point, the second point. It's powerful because if you say here's the first point, here's the second point, here's the third point, and originally you said I've got 3 points, people are counting. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, got them all. So they know, all right, we got everything we came here to get. Came here to get 3 points, got 3 points, we're good to go. Or more importantly, if somebody's given through some sort of a process, complex process, okay, process got 7 steps. Really helps to keep track of those steps. Here's the first step, here's the second step, third step, fourth step, fifth step, sixth step, seventh step. So name the number. Name the number. And that'll help you move from here to there. Help you make that transition. Simply and powerful. There is a challenge though. And it's something that some speakers have a real challenge with, real issue with. If you're going to number your steps, if you're going to name the number of those steps, remember, keep track of which step you're on. I made that mistake a few times. Okay, here's the first step. And for the third step, not good. Not good. So if you're going to name the number, you have to name the correct number. And there's a simple way to make sure that happens right, is that practice the speech. Go over and over so you know those steps cold. Okay, here's the first step. All right, the second step. Okay, the third step. Now, it sounds easy to say first, second, and third, but remember, when you do this on a stage, you do this in a presentation, probably with the first step, you got to talk a lot. Maybe 10 minutes or so about that first step. That time you got to remember you've done the first step. To help you remember that, keep repeating things, like name the number. Just going to keep repeating the first step. Okay, the first step is, this is an important first step, in using the first step, all the way throughout that section about the first step, keep repeating first step. Make sure you remember it. And then, the second step is, and keep talking about the second step. This will make it very clear in the audience's mind. Okay, now we're talking about the first step. Now we're talking about the second step. Be careful if you refer back to the first step. Don't do that too much. The audience will get really confused if you're in the middle of the second step and all of a sudden they're all the time referring to the first step. They'll get confused about what step they're actually on. So first step, second step, and third step, and repeat it. And maybe you've had this happen where you're talking in the second step and you refer back to the first step and then go on to the third step and then you say the second step, the first step. Maybe you've done that. I used to do that. So I got feedback afterwards of, Tim, I don't know what step you were talking about. You talked about the first, second, and third step all the way through your presentation. Not good. Not good. So learn from that. Name the number and be consistent about that number. You're on the first step, you're on the first step. Don't go too far down on the steps to follow. And if you do need to refer back to the first step, you somehow make it really clear that you're on the second step. And then, okay, we're talking about the first step briefly, but we're on the second step. If you can do it. If you can't do it, just stay out of it together and say, first step, okay, now here comes the second step. And that's name the number. All right, to wrap things up, the things you've learned today about transition and the importance of transitioning, how to get from here to there. First thing is, pause for the point. Pause for the point. And when you're pausing, be careful to make sure it's a long enough pause. You don't pause long enough, it'll be like one of those stop signs, where drivers just kind of slow down but don't quite get fully stopped and they just keep on going. Your whole transition is all about pausing for the point. You don't pause. People get really confused about which step, which point you're on, what you're talking about. Pausing for the point is very useful, very powerful. But make the pause. Then go on with the next point. If you've got a lot of pauses in your speech anyway, and that's not going to work, then use a different transition and make a mission for your position. Make a mission for your position on stage. If you are moving around on stage, if you've got a full stage to move around on, great. Each time you move to a different point, move physically on the stage. Make it large enough movements the audience can see you. In a smaller audience, maybe you don't need to make huge movements, but in a big audience, make some really major moves. People understand clearly, okay, I'm moving from this point to this point. Make that big physical movement. Make a mission for your position. Now, if you're behind a lectern, you're reading your notes for whatever reason, that's fine. Then use these things. Use your hands. Here's one point. Here's the next point. If you're in a situation where people really need to keep track of which points they are and the order of those points, then name the number. Name the number. Particularly if you have something that deals with steps. There's one step, there's the next step, there's the next step. Okay, great. Here's the first step, here's the second step, here's the third step, and so on. So if you have a 7-step process, then name all 7 steps. However, when you're naming all 7 steps, make sure you keep track of which step is which. If you're on the second step and keep calling it the third step, that's going to be real confusing. It's easy to do if you spend 10 minutes talking about the first step, and then you shift to the next step. You may have forgotten by the time you get to the end of that 10-minute section what step you're on. Make sure that doesn't happen. Just say it over and over again. Here's the first step. Using the first step. Very important in the first step. Keep repeating those things. Name the number. That'll help you transition. You're putting a speech together. A challenge is, how do you get from one point to the next? Once you get all those points down, great. But how are you going to get from one point to the next? Simple transition methods can help you. Now, if you don't use these methods, you're going to find the audience is confused. They don't really know quite what's going on. If you don't have any way to transition from one point to the next, they may presume you're just talking about one point, and maybe you're talking about 3 or 4. They won't be able to keep up. Won't be able to understand all the stuff that's going on. So, make sure the transitions are clear. Make sure they're powerful. Make sure they're useful. Maybe it's a pause. Maybe it's a movement. Maybe it's simply a number. Whatever transition you use, make sure it works smoothly. And once you do get these transitions down, you'll discover that the audience has a lot of respect for you. Because they know you're keeping track of all the different stuff going on there. It's an easy way that takes very little time, very little effort to put together. You can throw together a speech with good transitions by using these simple methods. And all you have to do is 1, 2, or 3. Okay, you're going to pause, going to use a movement, or you're going to use a number. It's that simple. And then, once you have these great points with smooth transitions, the audience starts to feel, yeah, this is a good place to be. You start feeling it's a good place to be. It's really, really enjoyable. So if you're giving a speech and you're trying to figure out how to get from here to there, don't worry about it. It's simple. Just go up on stage, transition naturally, take the audience on a joyful ride of your thoughts, your ideas, your concepts, and lift them to a new level of understanding.